Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Course of World History. I'm your host, Mr. Samuelson, and today we are talking about the Trans-Saharan Trade and trade routes. Our essential question here is, what was the lasting impact of Trans-Saharan trade on West Africa? So, Trans-Saharan trade. These trade routes really connected West Africa with the rest of the world through the Middle Ages. This was not a time of ocean-going trade. And being south of the Sahara Desert, they really had to pass through those deserts to be connected to the Mediterranean world and the greater world beyond. Now, gold and salt were the main trade items for these West African empires. Later, slaves would be increasingly important as well, as all of these items were in high demand throughout the world. Now, the Saharan Desert was very difficult to cross. But that difficulty did mean that for those merchants who are willing to make that journey and put that risk out there, they could expect a really large profit from engaging in this trade. And that is why these caravans did it, for access to that wealth, for that profit in the Trans-Saharan trade. Now, the West African empires themselves, from 700 to about 1500 CE, whichever West Africans could control the trade routes, could control tremendous amounts of wealth, and build strong empires. The three best known of these trading empires are the Empire of Ghana, which was first, and then the Empire of Mali, which came second, and the very last Empire of Songhai. Each of these empires would rise and fall depending upon how well they could control trade from West Africa to points north. Now, their northern trading partners were the various Islamic empires. The various Islamic empires, beginning with the Umayyad Caliphate in the late 600s, 700s, and so on, became the primary trading partners of West Africa, being just on the other side of the Sahara Desert. Now, it was through these Islamic empires that West African goods spread out to the world. West African gold started showing up everywhere. And the rest of the world's goods made their way down into West Africa. And you would find Silk Road products like silk and porcelain and spices and olive oil and wine, all making their way down into West Africa because of the rest of the world's connection to the Silk Road and that passing through the Islamic empires. Now, as Islam was expanding, they conquered huge sections of the Mediterranean world. They pushed out east into Central Asia. They never, however, made serious inroads into West Africa because this Saharan Desert was such a huge geographic boundary. The Saharan Desert is about the size of Europe, and passing through it is not an easy thing to do. Now, merchants and a small merchant train could do it, but try to imagine crossing that desert with tens of thousands of warriors and a large army, and that's a really difficult thing to do. So the Islamic Empire never attempted seriously to cross the Saharan Desert and to conquer West Africa. That does not mean, however, that Islam didn't spread. Islam spreads from North Africa through this Saharan trade route. And it does so because merchants from West Africa learn that it's much easier to engage in trade in the Islamic Empire if they themselves are Muslims. And so merchants will be amongst the first to convert to Islam in order to make trade with the Islamic Empire easier to manage. And once the merchant class, the wealthy merchant class, is converting to Islam, their influence then spreads to the ruling classes of the West African empires, and pretty soon most of our West African leaders and the upper class in West Africa are also converting to Islam. Many in the lower classes remained true to traditional West African religions, tribal religions and whatnot, but most of the upper class had become Muslim through this period. Now, the West African trade routes are not permanent. These Saharan trade routes do go into decline, and they go into decline for a number of reasons. But beginning with, they were always difficult, and it was always dangerous. I mean, we're basically crossing a desert the size of Europe That is difficult and that is dangerous. But what really got it going, what really caused the decline of this trade, was the decreasing wealth of North Africa. As the Islamic Empire encounters its own problems through the 12, 13, 1400s, there's simply less wealth in North Africa. And this gets compounded once the Portuguese caravels start to arrive in West Africa. Because these caravels are, right, they're boats, and they're going to drive trade along the coasts. And if it's now really difficult and dangerous and less profitable to take your goods north through the Saharan desert, it becomes easier to move your goods south along the rivers out to the coast and trade with the Portuguese. Portuguese, however, are able to use their military to control a number of ports along the coast and cut into the profitability for the West African empires, which are inland, not coastal in nature. So as West Africans, mostly inland empires are weakened, they're weakened through this lack of trade, through the lack of wealth, not getting as much money. They become more and more of a target. The final of the great West African empires, Songhai, will collapse in 1591. It had been a collapse, a slow decline going since the 1400s. But really the death nail in this empire of Songhai was when Morocco, a northwest African nation, sees an opportunity for conquest and for loot, and they are able to actually get an army to cross the Saharan desert. And they bring down a large army from the north and attack this weakened empire. They capture, they loot the West African cities, particularly the super wealthy city of Timbuktu, and carry away a lot of that wealth. And that shatters the strength of West African power, and it leads into a period of mostly foreign control of the region, either North African nations coming down or increasingly the Portuguese and other European nations establishing dominance over or direct control of the region. And that will continue from 1591 all the way to the 1960s, when the decolonization movement once again allows West Africa to be ruled by Africans. That is all that I've got for today. I hope that you found this lesson informative, and I will see you next time. Farewell.